Good morning. This meeting of the board is a hybrid physical virtual meeting. I would like to welcome those in the boardroom with me today. While keeping your microphones muted, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and justice. At this time, I will ask the secretary to the board to address a few technical and protocol items.
We have a quorum. The full board is present for this meeting. Chairman Logan, Board Member Hall, and Board Member Smith. Your microphone should normally be muted except for board members and presenters. Please ensure that you have silenced any mobile devices you have with you. The virtual portion of this hybrid meeting is on Cisco WebEx. We have two OIT staff, Ben Rana and Victor Amaya, monitoring and managing the meeting. They will be locking this meeting and no new connections will be allowed. OIT will be advancing the slides, so you will hear presenters say, "Next slide." If you are an FCA or FCA staff member, you're considered a panelist. The outside visitors are considered attendees. Everyone will see the slides as they advance. If you lose connectivity in this meeting, please contact Victor Amaya. Lastly, this meeting is being recorded. The video recording of the open portion of this meeting will be posted for public viewing for a limited period of time. Chairman Logan, that concludes the technical and protocol items. We're ready to continue when you are.
Thank you. The secretary will now read an opening statement on the Government in the Sunshine Act.
This is an open Farm Credit Administration board meeting under the Government in the Sunshine Act. If anyone raises the subject, that may be discussed in closed session as permitted by the Government in the Sunshine Act. Chairman Logan will entertain a motion to close the meeting.
We will now review the published meeting agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as published?
Move to adopt the agenda as published.
I second that motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, the secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Logan?
Aye, the motion carries. Next, we will consider whether any portions of the meeting should be closed to the public.
The agenda does not include items that we should properly discuss in closed session. I move that the entire meeting remain open.
I second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, the secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Chairman Logan?
Aye, the motion carries. Please turn to tab 1. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes as presented behind tab 1.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the minutes for the November 14th, 2024 regular board meeting as presented.
I second that motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, the secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Logan?
Aye, motion carries. Please turn to tab 2. At this time, I will ask Greg Lyons of ODAE and Nicole Yadoff of OE to present the quarterly report on economic conditions and system condition and performance. This is an information item.
Good morning, Chairman Logan, Board Member Hall, Board Member Smith. My name is Greg Lyons of the Office of Data Analytics and Economics, here with my colleague Nicole Yadoff of the Office of Examination to give this quarter's report on economic conditions and farm credit system condition and performance. Next slide. In today's topics for open session, first I'll be going through the economic conditions affecting the farm credit system, from the general economy to the agricultural economy and slightly into farmland markets, before passing it off to Nicole to talk through the conditions and performance. Next slide. So first, with the general economy, the U.S. economy has shown surprising resilience through the end of 2024. The latest estimates for Q3 growth were 3%, with slightly slower estimates for Q4. And one of the dominant explanations for this robust has been productivity growth that we've seen, which is a strong underlying basis for economic expansion. Now, due in part to this, we've seen that many economists are forecasting that the U.S. economy will remain in positive, though slower growth in 2025. Now, productivity growth is also a strong support for real wage growth, and we have seen that personal consumption has been behind much of the economic expansion that we've seen throughout 2024. Critically for agriculture, what we have seen is continued expansion in spending at food at home and food away from home. And food away from home is critically important for segments such as cattle and dairy producers who are highly reliant on that sort of spending. Now, there have been some warning signs for lower income households, where we've seen that credit card delinquencies are at their highest level since 2011. Real median household income is below 2019 levels. And in general, lower income households have been the most exposed to fast growing costs, such as housing cost increases. Next slide. Turning to inflation, we have seen headline inflation continue to fall, though more stable measures show modest residual inflation. Now, we did see in yesterday's report that overall CPI did tick up modestly, while core inflation did remain flat. But what we have seen is that over the last 6 months, we have seen that energy cost declines have been largely been behind the decline in overall inflation. But core inflation, which strips out the more volatile components of energy costs and food costs, has been driven in large part by increase in shelter costs. Now, we did receive good news yesterday where shelter cost growth did continue to decline, and we are seeing some positive growth, especially for rental markets, where new lease cost growth has been flat through the back half of 2024, and the hope is that that will continue to influence cost growth next year. Now, housing markets are a little more tight, where we have seen continued elevated building costs and high lending rates continue to place pressure on that market. There have been slight increases in the number of homes up for sale, but that section of cost growth will remain a little more under pressure heading into next year. Next slide. For labor markets, after several years of tight condition, we're approximating something that is much more typical. On the left-hand chart here, you'll note that job openings, and that black line there, is just about equal to total unemployment level. That's the first time outside of 2020 that we've experienced that since 2017. And on the right-hand chart, what we are seeing is that nominal wage growth has continued to come down. Real wage growth still does remain positive at about 2% per year, well in line with historic averages. Now, we did see a job report last week where we did see an additional 250,000 jobs added. However, there were some concerning signs. When we looked a little closer at the report, we have seen that labor force participation rates have declined very mildly. However, I would note that there is an increasing strain on those who are currently out of the workforce, as the median duration of unemployment has continued to rise, and the number of long-term unemployed, those unemployed for 26 weeks or longer, has also continued to decline, or increase, pardon me. Next slide. Now, this decline in both inflation and the softening of the labor market has led the Federal Reserve to emphasize the importance of its dual mandate. In its November communications, there were several critical phrases. One is that the Federal Reserve is telegraphing that they have gained confidence that inflation is on a sustainable path back to 2%. And they're also noting that current productivity growth is supportive of the wage growth that we are seeing. Now, since the latest FOMC projections were released in September, markets have become a little more bearish on rate reductions, due in part to core inflation plateauing and the job report numbers that we have received. But we'll receive more information on this when the FOMC reconvenes next week. Next slide. Turning to agricultural markets, the USDA released its latest projection for farm income in early December, and they found that while aggregate farm incomes were forecast to decline only $6 billion and still remain well above historic averages, this really understates a sharp divergence in the experience of crop and livestock producers that we're going to see in 2024. Crop receipts fell $32 billion in 2024 relative to 2023, while livestock receipts rose $15 billion. Now, a reduction in expense is forecast to help all producers. We're seeing large declines in expenses for feed, fertilizer, and fuels, although there are still some increasing costs for things such as interest on debt or on labor costs. Now, at an aggregate level, we can look at this and say that liquidity and profitability ratios for the sector have been largely stable. Solvency ratios are improving, but these aggregate stories really are masking subsector strain. Next slide. To emphasize this, on the left-hand side, this chart here shows average farm business net cash farm income for cash grain producers. The USDA began generating this series back in 2010, and they are forecasting that in 2024, corn and soybean producers will see their lowest average net cash farm income since they began this series in 2010. The primary driver for this is that while prices have retreated back to late 2020 levels, input expenses, critically for things such as fertilizer, are still well above the levels they were in 2020. So margin compression is going to be a key story for cash grain producers in the 24-25 crop marketing year. Turning to livestock, that sharp decline in feed costs has led to generally strong returns across the sector, with cattle and dairy producers experiencing very strong producers and lower but positive returns elsewhere. We are seeing that exports are also generally supportive for producers across the livestock sector. There are going to be some concerning signs due to things like HPAI, with the USDA begin to set collections of milk next week for testing of HPAI, and also seeing continued impacts to livestock or poultry operations across the country over the last 30 days. For fruit and tree nuts, what we have seen is that while there has been modest increases in aggregate levels of prices, we are seeing a lot of variability across the sector here. For things such as pistachios and almonds, we've seen that increases in exports have offset increases in production, and prices continue to increase from very low levels those producers experienced over the last several years. Elsewhere across fruits and nuts, most of the variation is attributable either to commodity-specific impacts, such as greening in Florida, or to regional weather-related impacts, such as those from Hurricane Milton. Next slide. Turning back to input expenses, again, so for input costs such as feed, what we've seen is that producers are back to experiencing the cost they did before the start of this agricultural cycle in 2020, while fertilizer costs remain elevated. But I do want to call out labor and interest costs that have continued to rise through the entire agricultural cycle. This is why for dairy and cattle producers who are mostly related to feed expenses that we've seen those sharp increases in returns, while cash grain producers are facing more margin compression. But I really do want to call out specialty producers, that's fruits, tree nuts, and vegetables. These producers are highly exposed to increases in labor costs, so the continued increase in costs through the entire agricultural cycle will lead to additional margin compression for these producers. Next slide. Turning to global weather conditions in the U.S. Were slightly dry at the end of the growing season. Those conditions have alleviated. There were dry pastures either in the northern plains and in the southwest, but we have seen those dry conditions alleviate, especially in the northern plains, and we haven't seen any impacts to things such as hay prices for cattle producers. We've also seen some alleviation of transportation-related issues in the Mississippi River. Now, globally, where there were some positive signs, while major competitors were having drought conditions, those producers have had their declines offset by production elsewhere. For example, in Russia, while there have been declines in Russian wheat production expectations, we have seen increases in expectations for productions in other places like Australia or Canada that largely offset those declines. While in Brazil, those dry conditions they're experiencing in southern Brazil are still expected to produce more in 2024 than they did in the prior year. And in Argentina, we're still seeing strong growth in corn and soybean production. This, combined with the fact that growing conditions are generally favorable in many key export destinations, such as China, mean that the global situation for production, it doesn't show a lot of upside for U.S. producers heading into the next crop marketing year. Next slide. Turning to land markets, real land value growth has cooled, with some leading indicators showing weakness in 2024. Across FCS districts, we find that land value growth was flat in real terms in 2024, although the co-bank district may have seen slow but positive real growth. But if we start to look in at specific regions, we see a little bit more weakness. On the right-hand side, this chart here is showing the average per acre value of farmland broken out by soil quality class in Iowa. And we have started to see declines in farmland values specifically for low quality land. We've also seen declines in the number of transactions happening. Both of these are indications of potential softness in land value markets, and so we will be watching closely over the next several quarters to see if these indications turn into broader declines in land values. Next slide. Just to touch on a couple other topics in land here. First is we have been paying attention to the growth in non-farm premiums. What we find is that in 2023, land that was within 10 miles of a major metro was worth about $8,000 on average, more than land that was 30 miles or more away from a major metro. These non-farm premiums tend to show significant strain during periods of general economic decline. So if we do see a softening of the U.S. market over the next year, we'll be paying close attention to these urban premiums. And second, you'll have noticed on the expense slide that while interest expense on debt does make up a small share of total expenses, that can understate the impact of interest cost increases on producers. The right-hand graph here is showing the percentage of farmland that has an associated lien. And in general, in the Corn Belt, we find that about 80% of farmland is free and clear of any debt. And what that does mean is that small increases in total sector levels of interest expenses on farm real estate debt can lead to relatively larger impacts to producers that do carry those additional costs. Next slide. That concludes the economic portion of our presentation today. With that, I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you, Greg. Does the board have any questions, Greg, on the material presented? Mr. Hall?
Just a quick one, Greg, and we talked about this a bit earlier in the week, just the issue of consumer debt and the growing consumer debt, and then potential impact then on demand for agricultural products. Would you spend a minute just sort of giving some insight on that?
Well, what we can say is that the lowest income households spend the greatest share of their income on food, and they tend to spend the most of that on food at home. What we have seen when we look at expense growth in the lowest income quartile houses is that has actually slowed, which can imply potential constraints. So we may be seeing constraints on household spending, especially for low income consumers, which can carry through to the general market.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
I do. Greg, you mentioned that there might possibly be seeing some weakness in land values, particularly lower value land. As you know, your single biggest cost in a crop farmer's budget is land cost. And I've read repeatedly that probably the most vulnerable right now in the current low price scenario is large cash grain operations that rely heavily on cash rents. Have you seen any indication that cash rents nationwide has mitigated at all or slowed down with the current income outlook?
So unfortunately, we don't have advanced indicators of cash rents. What we can say is that during the last agricultural cycle, it took more than a year for cash rents to fully start to account for the declines in agricultural incomes. The USDA data on this tend to be delayed, but we are going to be watching closely for the next cash rent surveys to see if that carries through. But we did see a mismatch between cash rents during the last decline in agricultural incomes.
Yeah, that's a good point. The lag in surveys, which a lot of landlords and tenants use as a basis for adjusting the rents year to year, but it does tend to be a year. So I would hope maybe this spring, I know the Iowa State land rent survey comes out in May, and you would hope you would see some type of movement there to reflect the economic times. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, Greg. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Logan, Board Member Hall, and Board Member Smith. My part of today's presentation is to provide an update on the system, financial condition, and performance as of September 30th, 2024. Overall, the system reported solid financial results for the first 9 months of 2024. The system portfolio continued to grow at a sustainable pace. Year-to-date earnings growth was strong, which in turn supported ongoing capital growth. The loan portfolio continued to perform well, and while the credit risk measures trended higher, overall portfolio credit quality remained favorable. Next slide, please. This first slide focuses on system growth. Overall, through the first 9 months of 2024, the system grew at a modest pace. Overall, as of September 30, system assets totaled $528 billion, up 3.9% year-to-date and 7.1% year-over-year. System loans totaled $414 billion, up 4.1% year-to-date and 7.6% year-over-year. As the chart on the left illustrates, year-to-date loan growth is slightly ahead of last year. However, for the past several years, quarterly loan growth has been strongest in the fourth quarter. The chart on the right provides a breakdown of system loan growth by major loan categories for the past 3 years. Collectively, these loan categories represent almost 95% of the system portfolio. Real estate mortgage lending has been much stronger in 2024, up 3.5% compared to 1.2% in 2023. Agribusiness lending is up 7.4%, but as the chart shows, loan demand can vary significantly. For 2024, most of the loan growth was in processing and marketing and farm-related business segments. Rural infrastructure lending slowed significantly in 2024. The power segment, which accounts for about 65% of rural infrastructure lending, is up 5.6% year-to-date compared to just over 16% for the same period a year ago. Next slide, please. Overall, the system loan portfolio continued to perform well in the third quarter, although credit risk measures were up for this quarter. The chart on this slide shows a percentage of loans classified less than acceptable by major loan category. As the chart indicates, the percentage of less than acceptable loans increased for all loan categories apart from rural infrastructure. At a portfolio level, less than acceptable loans equaled 5% September quarter end compared to 4% a year ago. Production and intermediate and agribusiness loans had the highest level of less than acceptable loans at 7%. Producers in certain commodity categories like cash grains, tree nuts, poultry, and swine continue to face challenging operating conditions. Credit stress continues to be elevated in these sectors as profit margins remain under pressure. Loan delinquencies, which represent accruing loans 30 days or more past due, were also slightly higher, increasing 4 basis points to 0.4% of total accruing loans. Next slide, please. As the chart on the left illustrates, the level of non-performing assets also increased in the third quarter. As of September 30, non-performing assets totaled $3.3 billion, up from $2 billion a year ago. The percentage of non-performing assets increased to 0.79% in the third quarter, up from 0.53% in 2023. Non-accruals, which account for the largest component of non-performing assets, equaled $2.9 billion at September 30, up from $1.8 billion at September 30, 2023. Like loans classified less than acceptable, non-accruals primarily reflect credit quality deterioration, impacting a limited number of borrowers in tree nuts, swine, poultry, and certain food processing sectors. As the chart on the right shows, the increase in non-accrual loans was concentrated in real estate mortgage and agribusiness loan categories. Finally, the percentage of non-accrual loans that were current as to principal and interest declined 53%, down from 57% at September quarter end 2023. Next slide, please. Overall, the system has reported solid financial results for the first 9 months of 2024. As the chart on the left shows, system earnings year to date through September totaled $5.9 billion, up 7.3% or $400 million from the same period a year ago. Year-to-date provisions for credit losses, which is the red line at the bottom of the chart, have declined in 2024, totaling $350 million compared to $464 million a year ago. The chart on the right highlights the year-over-year changes in key components of net income. As you can see, higher net interest income and, to a lesser extent, lower provisions for credit losses were the primary contributors to the increase in year-over-year net income. Net interest income increased $458 million from a year ago as continued loan growth supported a higher level of average earning assets. Year-over-year average earning assets for the 9 months ending September 30 were up almost $27 billion or 5.8% over the same period in 2023. The second chart on the right of the slide focuses on net interest spread and net interest margin. Through the first 9 months of 2024, annualized net interest spread continued to compress, declining 9 basis points to 1.84% as compared to year-end 2023. Net interest margin slipped 2 basis points to 2.41%. Next slide, please. This next slide focuses on system capital. Overall, strong earnings continued to support system capital. As of September 30, system capital totaled $79.1 billion, up $6.8 billion or 9.4% year over year. The system capital to assets ratio increased to 15% as of the third quarter, up from 14.7% a year ago. As noted on the slide, regulatory capital levels at all system banks and associations remain sound and continued to be well above regulatory requirements. Bank liquidity also remains strong, with all banks having a liquidity position far exceeding the regulatory minimum. Overall, the bank aggregate liquidity position was at 178 days compared to 176 days a year ago. Finally, the system maintained significant risk-bearing capacity as the combination of total capital and the allowance for credit losses equaled more than 19% of system loans outstanding as of quarter end. Next slide, please. For an individual institution, composite FERS ratings represent an overall assessment of the safety and soundness of that institution. The chart on this slide provides a snapshot of the combined composite FERS rating for all Farm Credit System banks and associations. Overall, third quarter composite FERS ratings remained favorable and continued to reflect the system's strong financial position. Collectively, about 98% of banks and associations had a composite rating of 1 or 2. One institution had a composite rating of 3 or lower, one fewer than year-end 2023. In total, less than 1% of system assets were held at institutions rated 3 or lower. Next slide, please. OE believes borrowers and system institutions will face a more challenging operating environment in 2025. Grain producers are facing significant margin compression as corn and soybean prices have fallen significantly, while production expenses remain elevated. Other commodity segments like tree nuts, poultry, and swine remain under stress as these industries try to balance production levels while facing uncertain demand and higher non-feed production costs. Tighter margins and lower profits also negatively impact available liquidity, increasing financing needs, and while interest rates are elevated. Lower net farm income and elevated interest rates have also important implications for farmland and collateral values. Finally, as the last bullet point highlights, there are a number of other factors that could significantly affect agriculture. This more challenging environment for borrowers is likely to be reflected in system credit quality. Fortunately, institutions have sufficient liquidity and financial strength to weather volatility in their operating environment. This concludes my part of today's presentation. Chairman Logan, Board Member Smith, and Board Member Hall, Greg and I want to thank you for your time and attention today. And at this time, I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Nicole. Does the board have any questions of Nicole on the materials presented? Mr. Hall.
I don't. Good job, Nicole. Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I guess it's more of a comment than a question, Nicole, but let's flip back to slide 26. I look at, and I think we commented on this maybe last year as well. At the same time, we've seen 3 years now of lower capital levels compared to the previous 6 years. The biggest decrease being from September 2021 to September 2022. At the same time, I look back at slide number 3 that shows, although small in numbers, show a trend of credit deterioration within the system. And I guess my comment is we need to be careful. The numbers themselves look good for strength of the system. They are. But I just keep coming back. We got to look at the trends. And we do have a slight trend of credit deterioration. And we do have 3 years of lower capital levels compared to the previous 6 years. Just something that I think bears watching. And that's all I had, Mr. Chairman, as far as comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any questions for you, Nicole. Thank you very much for the presentation. Please turn to tab 3. This time, I will ask Angela Greenlee and Rachel Connolly of OE to present the semi-annual report on OE operations. This is an information item.
Good morning, Chairman Logan, Board Member Hall, and Board Member Smith. I'm Rachel Connolly, a supervisory examiner in our Office of Examination from the Bloomington, Minnesota office. I'm here today with my colleague Angela Greenlee. She is the Director of Operations for the Office of Examination. We're here today to present the semi-annual report on operations for the Office of Examination for fiscal year 2024. Next slide, please. Much of today's presentation will focus on the results of activities related to OE's operating plan objectives, including risk, supervision, and examination activities. And within this, we'll include a review and update on the status of our fiscal year 2024 National Oversight Plan focus areas and related activities. In addition, we will discuss the system's fulfillment of its public mission, OE's operational efficiency and effectiveness, and human capital planning. We will also provide an update on OE's budget results for the fiscal year. Next slide, please. This slide highlights what we accomplished during fiscal year 2024 for our risk, supervision, and examination objective. For example, OE conducted on-site examination or oversight activities as planned at all 4 funding banks, 52 associations, as well as 6 other entities. OE issued 46 reports of examination, 43 interim activity letters, and 72 FERS letters. Also, while most system institutions operate under normal supervision, there are currently 2 institutions under an elevated level of supervisory oversight. The primary concerns at those institutions were related to governance, not financial performance. In addition to oversight and examination activities, other examination-related efforts included issuing examination guidance, both internally to staff and externally to system institutions. For example, during the fiscal year, we issued informational memoranda, including the National Oversight Plan for the fiscal year and the annual threshold adjustments and guidance from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Combined, we made 14 updates or revisions to the examination manual, examination work papers, and OE directives. For the examination manual in the last 6 months of the fiscal year, we made the following updates, which were published both internally and externally. In May, we made updates to the planning, operations, earnings, credit administration, and financial and shareholder reporting topics. In June, we made updates to the liquidity risk and liquidity management exam manual topics. And in October, we made an update to the annual report to shareholders work paper. In addition, OE staff continued to participate in external meetings and work groups. Next slide, please. In addition to the activities at individual system institutions, there are other significant strategies and initiatives as part of OE's National Oversight Plan, or NOP, which focus on a broader set of system risk oversight and examination objectives. NOP focus areas are nationally focused areas of emphasis that address material or emerging risk issues within the farm credit system. Listed on this slide are the 5 NOP focus areas for fiscal year 2024. We had 10 related strategies, all which were completed as planned. Of the 10 strategies, 7 were systemic strategies, which are generally reviewing and evaluating system-wide risk, while the remaining 3 strategies were institution strategies, which are implemented by EICs at institutions based on risk assessments they complete. I'd like to highlight some of our strategies and accomplishments for each focus area. The first focus area was cybersecurity threats and a changing operational environment. Examination activities related to this focus area included reviewing, analyzing, summarizing, and reporting to FCA and FCA management the results of the cybersecurity assessment. We completed our assessment of vulnerability management practices across the system, and we reported on vulnerability management and incident response to OE leadership. We also reviewed large-scale development projects over critical financial management system at certain system institutions and technology service providers. We reported our results in examination reports and internal management reports. We continue to monitor and evaluate large-scale projects as necessary. The second focus area was capital markets loan growth and increased risk in large shared assets and commodity segments. Examination activities related to this focus area included completing a horizontal examination activity at select institutions with high growth or high concentrations in this portfolio segment, and we evaluated their internal control frameworks and credit expertise. During loan examinations, we sampled leveraged borrowers and those in stressed industries to ensure risk was appropriately monitored and managed in those accounts. We are in process of developing a year-end summary report of the completed loan reviews, which we will provide to OE management at the end of this month. The third focus area was long-term financial stewardship. For this area, we completed a system-wide association annual financial risk assessment and provided training to examiners to help them identify areas to further evaluate during examination or oversight activities. The fourth focus area was stress analysis in a period of heightened volatility and uncertainty. For this focus area, we provided training to examiners on the revised stress testing informational memorandum. The fifth and final focus area was standards of conduct, which was a continuing area of focus from fiscal year 2023. We evaluated standards of conduct programs at institutions throughout the fiscal year during our examinations. We are currently rolling up the results of our examination activities to report to OE management. Next slide, please. One of our consistent operating plan objectives is to evaluate the system's fulfillment of its GSE public mission in meeting the changing needs of agriculture and rural America. Our ongoing oversight and examination activities regularly address compliance with a variety of mission-related areas. In addition to these ongoing activities, in fiscal year 2024, we focused on young, beginning, and small farmer programs and the needs of small, low-risk associations. Our YBS strategies included continuing to collaborate with ODAE and OIT on several items, including proposing changes to exam guidance and rating criteria, and providing staff training based on the YBS final rule and Book Letter 40 updates. We also worked with ORP and ODAE on internal and external YBS FAQs. We reviewed the 2024 qualitative YBS rating results and prepared a summary. For the small, low-risk association strategy, we met with CEOs of small associations throughout the year. We discussed OE's steps to address their concerns. Currently, we are considering input from the group about examinations. Next slide, please. With regard to OE operational efficiency and effectiveness, OE continued to enhance and expand examination tools available in the EDGE environment and reports. Recent enhancements included working with OIT on the new OE resource planning tool. We also began to work with OIT on the next round of EDGE enhancements that will include updates in the loan work paper, the scoping tool, and OE feedback application. We also worked with OIT on a Teams collaboration feature for staff to use during examinations. In addition, we continue to modernize OE management reporting and planning processes by transitioning from Access databases to Power BI. Some notable examples included transitioning human capital reporting to Power BI and improving the OE staff days and travel dollar reports. We also continue to make improvements to the FCS loan database. We are working with the system to add new data fields and assess and improve data reliability. Some examples include new funds held fields and our collaboration with the Information Data Workgroup on the charge-off and recovery fields. We also developed new reports for staff use, for example, the large shared asset report to monitor large participation loans that are shared within the Farm Credit System. Next slide, please. At this point, I will turn it over to Angela Greenlee to provide a human capital and budget update.
Good morning. Chairman Logan, Board Member Smith, and Board Member Hall. I'd like to start out our human capital update by talking about how we strengthened our workforce this year. This year, we did complete all of our human capital strategies, and we had plans for hiring, retention, training, development, and knowledge transfer. We did hire 16 new staff members during the fiscal year, and of the 16, 13 were new associate examiners. 2 were commission examiners, and 1 was a finance specialist. I also have some good news to report on retention. Our attrition levels were at 8%, and this is the same as it was during our last year-end report. This is below what we had planned, which was the 9%, and far below what we experienced in fiscal year 2022 when it was 17%. So good news there. For staff development and training and knowledge transfer, we continue to offer training and temporary assignments. We also continue to develop and conduct training for our commission staff. We want to make sure that they are up to date and their skills stay sharp so we can accomplish our mission. We also provided a variety of training throughout the year, and we provided this training during OE managers meetings, during OE all staff meetings, as well as our weekly field office staff meetings. The planning for our 2025 OE conference is well underway, and we will have a very heavy focus on staffing and development during the conference. Next slide, please. I'd like to highlight some of our human capital outcomes for the fiscal year. This slide shows that we ended the fiscal year slightly above where we would thought would be on total staff, but very near our optimal goal. However, we do remain below where we would like to be for our commission staff and our technical specialists. For these two segments, our optimal goal is 125. The table on the left shows that we ended the year at 186 total staff members on board. This was just slightly higher, just 4 higher than what we had planned. Again, very close to our goal. And the reason why there was this slight variance was because we had more staff on board at the beginning of the year, and then we also had the fewer attritions, as I had mentioned. The chart on the right shows where we're at with our commission staff. We did end up at 83 at the end of the fiscal year. This was 3 below where we wanted to be. And again, this is mostly because we had just fewer at the beginning of the year than what we had planned, just very slightly still recovering from that 2022 number. In good news, we did have 9 new commissioned examiners pass a test during fiscal year 2024, and this did offset the 8 retirements that we had. And subsequent to this date, in October of 2024, so technically fiscal year 2025, we held another commissioning test, and we had 5 staff members pass that test. So we did continue to add to our commissioned examiner staff levels. So while we know we do have some progress to be made in this area, we are very committed to making sure that we keep developing our staff, commissioning our staff in order to meet our mission. Next slide, please. Turning now to OE budget results. As you can see from the chart on the left, we used nearly 100% of our $38.7 million budget. And this was primarily because we did return to normal travel. Our examiners are back on site and interacting with the system in person. So that is good news. The table on the right shows that we ended the year right at budget with regard to our full-time equivalents. Next slide, please. All right, so in summary, I would like to highlight some of our accomplishments that we made during fiscal year 2024. We did conduct all of our planned examination and oversight activities. We completed all of our OE operating plan objectives and strategies, including all of our NOP strategies. We remain very highly focused on ensuring that OE has a very highly skilled staff. And finally, we did continue to actively manage our budget as we return to normal travel. Next slide, please. And this concludes our presentation today. Rachel and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Does the board have any questions of the staff on the material presented, Mr. Hall?
I don't have a question, but Mr. Chairman, something I've noticed in the last year or two, office directors are bringing in people from the field. We're having different people present to us. And what I realize is just the depth of talent we have within this agency. And I want to thank Mike for doing that and all office directors. It really demonstrates the quality of people we have at this agency. I just want to say that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I agree 100%. Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I'd like to congratulate you on 9 new examiners and gaining one net. We're getting there. But I had the opportunity to join the staff that was preparing the candidates in Omaha here a couple months ago, and boy, the hard work and the enthusiasm that goes into preparing those candidates, we know that's a strong emphasis in OE, and congratulate you for that success. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't have any questions. Thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please turn to the adjournment tab. There's no further business to bring before the board. I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move we adjourn the meeting.
I second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, the secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Hall,
Aye.
Chairman Logan.
Aye, the motion carries. The meeting is adjourned.